I'll wait for a minute or two just in case there are some people still coming. For those of you who have not been to these question and answer sessions before, in essence, it's quite simple. I stand here and you fire questions at me and I have absolutely no idea what you're going to ask me about. I'm thinking Scotland might come up, but other than that, I have absolutely no idea. It's free-flowing and I will do my best at all times to be candid. Where it is a personal opinion, I will make it clear that it's a personal opinion. Where it's a sort of party government type position, I will make that clear as well. Those of you who have been to these sessions before will know there are some occasions where my opinion is not necessarily in line with where the government is and the party is. The reason I do that is because I think that, actually I think it's the Scottish referendum is for evidence of it. There's a complete breakdown in trust, I think, in British society, in those organisations, institutions, individuals that matter to all of us, so police, politicians, dare I say it, also doctors, with some of the things that happen in the NHS, BBC, Jimmy Savile, the list goes on. And so there's a real sense of anti-establishment feel in Britain. And I think the Scots are the first to get an opportunity to wield that anti-establishment feeling in a referendum today. I'm just fingers crossed that enough of them have a broader perspective to not vote for independence, but I fear it's touch and go. So without further ado, first question. Yes.
In hindsight, what do you think could have been done differently in organising a referendum in Scotland?
Okay, on the basis that my comments probably won't make it into the wider public ether before the poll closes at 10 o'clock, quite a lot could have been done differently in terms of this referendum. I'll lay my cards on the table. I was not in favour of devolution in the first place. When was it, 98, 99? I think as soon as you go down this path, you end up trying to catch up all the time, give them more, give them more, give them more. When I ran in Wales in 2005 for Westminster, I didn't actually meet anybody in Blaen y Gwent who supported the establishment of the Welsh Assembly, because just over 50% of the people who bothered to turn up had voted for it, and hardly any of them were in South Wales. And so, the same in Scotland. I think it was a mistake in the first place, this devolution, and I will be party political, that wasn't us. And I think that we are now reaping the benefits of such a dreadful decision. So that's the first thing, because in 2011, SNP were a majority and they were always going to push for a referendum. Second mistake, anniversary of Bannockburn. Third mistake, same year as the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. Fourth mistake, and probably the most glaring mistake, and I fear that the responsibility for this rests with some senior politicians in Westminster, is to have given yes to the campaign to separate. It should have been no. It should have been yes for the union. It's a schoolboy error of the hugest, it's a massive error. And so therefore, the campaign's always been described as negative if you were being pro-union, because it's no. You know, I'm for no. It's hardly the most inspiring position to be in. I think the Conservative Party, most of my colleagues have been very disciplined, actually, in not expressing views about the union, because we've been told this perception is that somehow we lose votes in Scotland. Well, I'll give you a little anecdote. I went on a stag weekend, not one of those naughty ones, a sort of a very mild stag weekend for an old schoolmate in June in Loch Ness. And I flew into Inverness and we were travelling in a taxi. And the taxi driver didn't know who I was and what I did as my day job and things. He was ranting about Alex Salmond, he was ranting about how untrustworthy he was, etc., etc., etc. And then he said, and where are the Conservatives? What about those people who are pro-union? Aren't the Conservatives and Unionist Party? And I sort of sat in the back of this cab, not saying anything, just listening, thinking to myself, that's not the perception I get of Scotland. And yet, there I was hearing it. And so I think the fact that the Prime Minister hasn't been up there until rather late in the day, being passionate about the Union, I think was a tactical error. I also think the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland should be passionate about being the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And to have ended up in a situation where the chap on the white horse coming in at the end to save it is Gordon Brown, you really do have to ask yourself, how bad have things got? However competent his speech was, it says a lot about how bad the rest of the speeches have been for that to be described as historic, game-changing. So I could go on. And also, and I think this is probably relevant to us sitting here, I wasn't consulted on throwing more money at them. I wasn't consulted on Devo Max, or whatever it's called. And neither, because I've spoken to colleagues, none of my other colleagues have been consulted on this decision to announce, oh, you can have more. Have some more, please stay. They get £1,200 per year per person extra on public services. When you look at the healthcare expenditure, and you compare Berkshire per head with Scotland, it'll make you weep. So if there's any discussions tonight about hospitals and GP surgeries and everything else, write in and ask them about the numbers. It's about, and don't quote me, but I think it's around about 40 to 50% per head is spent more per year in Scotland than in Berkshire. Look at the net transfer of taxes, business rates, approximately £20 billion per year net transfer of business rates alone from the southeast of England to the rest of the Union. Look at the proportion of the economy that is the public sector in Scotland, around about 60%, 70% in Wales, similar sort of figure in Northern Ireland, 65% in the northeast of England. I fear actually that this whole unfortunate process in which between 3 and 4% of the population can decide to break up Great Britain. How does that work? This whole unfortunate process is going to cause a rise of English nationalism. A real sense of, hang on a minute, you get more money, you get more representation at Westminster than your population deserves, and your MPs get to vote on issues that impact English constituencies and not Scottish ones, and you want more? And you keep claiming that it's all about social justice? Excuse me? That a Polish student can go there and study in a university for nothing, but an English student has to pay tuition fees? Excuse me? And you want more? I'm a member of the Conservative and Unionist Party. Okay, that's the full name of my political party. So there's a part of me, maybe it's more my heart than my head, that wants them to vote no this evening. But I know that a yes will be a simpler outcome politically. And I do often think maybe they need to just have a taste of being alone. Because if they do vote yes, I want the 6 million, I think it was, in 1707 prices that was given to Scotland as an inducement to join the Union. I want that back with inflation and everything else. And with regards to oil, the maritime law settlement on whether those oil fields are Scottish or English is still not concluded. So they talk about Scottish oil, depends how you draw the border, and there isn't a clear outcome on that yet. I also want to break down the subsidy to renewables. It goes north of the border. 30% of UK money spent on subsidy of renewables, wind farms and the like, go to Scotland. There's only 8% of the population. So I want that back, retrospective and in the future. I want them to take a 9% share of the nation's debt, which at the moment is about £120 billion. They're not using our currency, and they're certainly not using the Bank of England to guarantee that currency. I could go on. And then, and there was a political representation. They should have the same population size as I have, 77,000 and counting. There are constituencies up there that are half that size. And those individuals get to vote on business in the House of Commons. If they vote yes, it's going to be really rough. Trust me. And I will be batting at that point for England, not for Britain. If they vote no, I will continue to bat for Britain. I could go on, but I won't. Listen.
Regardless of the vote, whether it be yes or no, do we need a First Minister of England to bat on our side?
Well, that's John Redwood's idea. John's been quite outspoken on this, and I'm broadly supportive of it. Probably yes in the current settlement, yes. I mean, personally, I think we have too much government. I would like to see unitary authorities across the entire country. I don't see why in some parts of the country have county, district, parish. I think those unitary authorities should be of a certain size. So, for instance, around here, I'd probably merge Woking and Bracknell Forest, because I think they're too small as entities. And I could go on about that if you wanted me to. I don't want a regional government, which is what the Liberals and the Labour Party want, and that's only about power. And fortunately, we have recent history of the North East voting firmly against having regional governments. So I think, I don't want access government, but I think we're going down the path of having an English Parliament. Well, like John Redwood has said, why shouldn't that English Parliament just sit in the House of Commons once a week and deal with English issues, and all of the MPs from English constituencies just sit there? Because I don't want to create another £400 million Parliament building like they've got in Scotland, which incidentally was paid for by the UK taxpayer. I don't want to do that. I think we've got a building. It needs a lot of repair. And, there's a deep intaking breath about how much the House of Commons and House of Lords is going to cost to refurbish, by the way. It's a huge bill. But it's a national, international icon, so we're going to have to suck it up. But if we're going to spend over £1 billion on the House of Parliament, refurbishing it, and it's not overdue, then I think we should use that building. But I do not want regional government. I want less government, not more. Who was next? Gentlemen.
If you want less government, can you just give us your view of whether police commissioners has been
I was not an enthusiast for that policy. This is where I'm going to go off the reservation. I was not an enthusiast for police commissioners, crime commissioners. Let's wait and see how it develops. It was not something that I thought was needed, but we are where we are. I can understand it was sort of driven by the sort of the local elected sheriff model in America and having more political accountability for the delivery of police services. There were police committees there were committees in place populated by local government primarily. I'm not. I struggle to be positive about it for a number of reasons, both local and national. We are where we are with it. I don't know whether, if there's a change of government, whether they will be scrapped or not. But again, it goes back to this sense of not wanting more and more people involved in the government of this country. We've got too many people involved in the government of this country, and you only have to look at the books to know that we can't afford it. So I'm being a bit sketchy here, a bit, and I know, because I wish we hadn't done it. But we did, and so I hope it's successful. And I think it's worth giving it at least 1, if not 2 terms of office before we can conclude whether it was a successful policy or not.
But who can drop contracts for people like this, which don't know to be sacked if they misbehave?
Yeah.
Who on earth thinks it's all that much of a contract?
I know. No defence. No defence. But there are problems with contracts within the public sector across the board. I mean, there are certain civil servants who allegedly have 6 years. So the contracts would be to pay them out 6 years to get rid of them. I mean, I personally have quite some radical views about the size of government in Whitehall, the number of departments that we have. It's about 33 people now entitled to sit a cabinet. I mean, I'm sorry, but 33 people making a decision. And so I would personally slash the number of departments, which would involve doing all new contracts for a lot of people. It's a massive job, but it's needed. Again, I keep coming back to the fact we've got to find the most cost-efficient way of delivering services to people that are necessary. And the state sometimes is the only way in which those services can be delivered. And I get that, but I'm not convinced we need to be spending 45–50% of GDP on the public sector. Hopefully I'm not.
Just wanted to drag us back to Scotland before that gets lost. The 2 points around that, you partly answered it already. One is it democratic that 4% of the population is deciding my future? Something I have no control over, something that is going to change my life, my children's life, forevermore. Is that democratic? Secondly, if, God forbid, the Scots do vote to go their own way, then what can we do to protect England and to get the best deal for England? Because the Scots have already said Bas Lane is out of the question, and you know, there's going to be huge costs for us. And I just wonder, you know, what your thoughts were on A, is it democratic? B, what can we do to protect ourselves? And sorry, there was a third part, and that is what happens to the general election next year?
Well, if you allow me to do the last part first, bizarrely, and you're all going to, if those of you don't know this, irrespective of tonight's referendum, there's no difference next year's general election. So therefore, you can have a situation next year where, for example, hypothetically, Ed Miliband becomes Prime Minister with a majority of, say, 20, of which that majority will be made up of the 40 or so Labour MPs from Scotland that they have. And so you'll end up with a British, inverted commas, elected government in May 2015, who then are going to be negotiating with the Scottish Parliament for a settlement for England. Now, I personally think the Labour Party in that situation is incredibly compromised because it's got skin on both sides of the game, and you know, it's just not. I don't know how they go ahead with that, which is why some talk has gone around about suspending the general election and the like. And the problem with that is that people then will say, well, hang on a minute, I don't want this Conservative-led government anymore. They shouldn't have more than 5 years. I want to replace it. And you can get yourself into a complete mess. So in answer to the second thing, it's a mess. Okay? In answer to because it's allied the democracy, the absence of I agree. I mean, I think that the breakup of the union should have been the responsibility of all of us to vote on. The problem is devolution. We gave devolution to one part of the country and not another part. So the Scots got more devolution than the Welsh. So the Scots were given the right to get a democratic mandate for change. The English were not given such a right to get a democratic mandate for change. So forgive me, blame the last guys, because that's why they're the ones who cobbled together this constitutional system. In reference to how the English come out of this, and the future, and the nuclear submarines, and everything else, this comes down to the hard bargain. Because if they voted to leave, personally, I think we're going to have to be really tough. I mean, really tough.
Who does that? Who does that?
Well, it will be the elected government, which is why I think there's a possibility that if there's a yes at 6:30 in the morning, you may very well see a general election this side of Christmas. Because there will be a sense of, well, how on earth can we start entering into negotiations on behalf of the rest of the United Kingdom with this current parliament, this current government? And I would suggest actually that all three party leaders are complicit in this situation. And so you may argue that all three should be replaced.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the problem. I'm not necessarily advocating anything here. I'm just pointing out to you that. So I was in Westminster today. It's quite intriguing the mood and the atmosphere amongst Labour MPs. You can tell by the body language. They looked thoroughly worried and depressed and thinking, what's going on? They're walking around, they were talking to each other. There was much more socialising going on between those MPs who contrary to the Daily Mail, MPs do go to Westminster, it's not City. And so they were milling around just trying to work out what was going on. And the problem for the Labour Party is if they lose Scotland, they might actually cease to be a party in its current form. They might have to make a decision to do the Social Democratic Party, sort of party of the centre-left type thing. There may be a complete reconfiguration of political parties going on in response to this, because the Labour Party would have only won a general election in a new United Kingdom, maybe, I think it's 66, maybe 97, 2001. I think in the other ones, I think they wouldn't, don't misguide, I'm not sure, but certainly they're the three where I think they would have won for sure, and the others they may have failed. So there's going to have to be those people who don't want to see a Conservative government. Better accept there's quite a large number of people in Britain who, in England, should we say England, otherwise you might have that people. Who are they going to vote for? Because as it currently stands, they might not get what they want, and they might think, well, maybe we need fewer political parties. So there's all manner of different things that could happen in the next few weeks, and my hunch, and I'll go, I think it's going to be about 55-45 or 54-46 in favour of no tonight. I think it's a shy no component, particularly with the physical intimidation that's been reported, and so I do think they're going to vote no. But actually that's also going to open up one hell of a mess, because at that point the English will start saying, well, we can't begin all of this to one part of the union. It's got to be equal, at which point we're going to see some interesting politics.
Something completely different.
Fine.
This is to do with education.
Sure.
What hope can you give those working in education, and further education in particular, and apprenticeship schemes, for an end to the reduction in funding that's been going on, given that there's an end to the recession?
Well, I'm not aware that there was ever a reduction in the funding of schools. The schools budget was actually protected in real terms. With regards to everything else, look, I guess I'd push back and say the debt of the nation would have doubled virtually under this parliament. We are spending in this financial year £100 billion more than we're getting in tax. So we're bequeathing the next government about 1.4 to 1.5 trillion pounds worth of debt. Can we all think about the size of that, having inherited about 800 billion? And so when people talk to me about cuts and austerity, I'm under no illusions that things have been difficult for some people, but the public expenditure in this country has continued to go up, and our debts have continued to go up. And I think any answer in context of spending, be it on education or be it health or anything else, you have to bear that in mind. I think in the future, the number of people staying in education beyond 18 will probably diminish in terms of the numbers that are funded by the state, because we can't afford it.
This is talking about the number of 16 to 18-year-olds who are going to be the people who are going to generate the wealth of this country.
Yes. I would say, though, that the unemployment for that age group, people just leaving, has gone down by 2/3 in this constituency since 2010. It's not like we haven't had success. But, again, we have a problem. It's called balancing the books. And I don't know how you go about reducing the size of outgoings without actually cutting expenditure. I don't know how you do that. And you have to make decisions about priorities. And somebody could make a point and say, well, we shouldn't be buying aircraft carriers, or we shouldn't have international development funding, or we shouldn't do this. These are all valid points.
These are messages that you're giving to our young people who are trying to go out there and find jobs.
Yes. And as I've said, the rate's gone from 4.2 to 1.4%.
And they're trying to go out there and compete against imported foreign labour.
Yep.
They're not able to get qualifications at the same rate. They're not taken on for
Particular qualifications you're referring to?
I'm thinking in particular about there's the Trailblazer apprenticeship scheme that's coming out, and also with apprenticeships in general. the new Trailblazer scheme is offering reduced funding to employers and to FE colleges for each apprentice. And so there's employers, small employers, are going to be asked to look for an amount of money for the administration of an apprentice. And where are they going to send this? How are they going to find this money?
Well,
so they are less likely to take on employees who apprenticeships when they can take on cheaper labour.
Yes, but the cheaper labour you're referring to presumably is European Union migration. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's that's one of the challenges you have with the freedom of movement of peoples in the European Union is that the economic benefit is cheaper costs to business, but the impact of it is potential unemployment in indigenous youth.
Well, yes,
So,
I would argue that what the government is giving is a message to young people that they are not worth that investment.
No, I would argue that it's not the state's role to subsidise business.
I would agree with you on that.
And so it is difficult when we have an open border with over 500 million other people who can move to where the jobs are. Now, it's a separate argument about whether we want that or not, and I'm sure there are some people who would say we don't want that. The problem is that that's the rules of the game of joining that common market. So if you want to be able to sell services and goods into the European Union, common market, the rules are there's a common market in people as well as services and goods. And so it is difficult because your average Eastern European can come in and is prepared to work for less. And so we get left in a situation where we have unemployment amongst young people being difficult to deal with, though I keep emphasising around here as an issue, we've done extremely well with the employment of people in the age group between 18 and 21. I hear what you say, but ultimately the solution to this is it's more than just one thing. I don't think the government should have such a large role in subsidising the employment of people on apprenticeship.
So what hope would you give those young people?
I give them the hope that they live in a safe and secure country with an economy that is growing, okay, which is more than one can say for a number of other countries in Europe. But yes, the future is going to be tough, it's going to be difficult. Those of you who heard me speak before, I don't sugarcoat this. I don't think we've had the tough period economically yet. I think the tough periods are to come. The idea that we think we're through it all because we've got a bit of growth, a bit of GDP growth. Take a look at the fundamentals underpinning that GDP growth. Look at the amount of money that has been printed. Look at the interest rates and how low they've been over a 5 to 6 year period. We have real challenges ahead of us, and part of it is trying to construct an economy, a country, which is being questioned this evening, and a country that has a long-term viable future in such a competitive world in which people are prepared to do things for much less than we are. So if you were sort of commissioning services of whatever kind, are you going to be commissioning in Crowthorne or are you going to be commissioning in Krakow? Their services, they're deliverable over online. Suddenly, this community is competing with a much bigger marketplace. And it's a real challenge for government to operate in that area, and it's made doubly difficult by our membership of a union where there is such significant disparities in economies. And it's why I'm very much of the opinion that I would leave the European Union if we don't change our relationship.
Do you think that would make the difference for the young people in this country?
I think it would make it easier for us to look at where are we here and try to adjust so that we can employ these people and find work for these people that is actually sustainable, which isn't in the public sector, because as I've just pointed out, we haven't got any money. We're already spending too much.
So would that mean that you would close borders then
I think that there's not close, control. I totally get the economic benefits of migration, but I think we need to have a handle on the type of migration that we need into our economy. And I think it's a rather odd situation that we've had over 2 million Eastern Europeans coming in, and we have around 2 million people on job seekers allowance. You know, you don't have to be too clever to think, well, that's a bit daft, because we're having to pay these people who are out of work whilst 2 million people come in. Now, there are some uncomfortable truths about a proportion, I don't know what percentage it is, of the people who aren't working, who don't want to work, and the fact that these people coming in are hungry for work, entrepreneurial. We all know this, I'm sure there are people in the room who employ Eastern Europeans to build their houses and their extensions. So there's some uncomfortable truths there, but the reality is that we have a problem because we're trying to educate our young and trying to create the circumstances in which business can thrive and jobs can be created. But if those jobs are then going to people who are coming in from abroad, and to a certain extent the money they earn is then leaving the country as well, it becomes a very difficult political balance, let alone anything else, which is why UKIP is getting its traction and
I
things.
completely agree with you, but I think the problem is that, like most parents, you will do something about for your children first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that our government should be doing something for our children, and
Yeah.
we should be giving them opportunities.
Numbers of apprentice schemes have done this, have been increasing.
Sorry?
The number of apprentices available have been
They
increasing.
might have been increasing, but the money that's available to them now is reduced.
Yes, but that's the challenge of governing when you're spending more than £100 billion and you're getting in. And that's the problem. And you have to try and find a way of taxing people in a way that doesn't inhibit entrepreneurship, in a way that is practical in the world in which we live, where money just streams across screens in different countries and things, across borders. So you can't overtax people. So everyone says, oh, tax the rich, you can't just move, or they'll move their assets. You've got to find a way of taxing and then governing with the amount of tax that you can actually realistically collect without actually inhibiting the desire to get on in life. It's really challenging. It was challenging when Maggie Thatcher was talking like this 40 years ago, and that was in a different world. Today's world, I mean, Alibaba today, the guy, the offering in New York or New York Stock Exchange, the guy's worth 12 billion quid. There's a Chinese guy who just set up a service company online that just basically puts people in touch with each other. It's worth billions. The world has changed, and so governing within that is increasingly difficult. Personally, again, it comes back to our membership. I don't look at the world and think I want to be in a protected bloc. I want my country to be nimble and successful and outward-looking beyond Europe, because actually Europe itself, in relation to the rest of the world, is contracting in terms of its economic size. It's everywhere else that it's growing. So Europe's got to wise up, basically. And we've got to think about the impact of the freedom of movement of people, not just on your children's futures, but also on a plethora of other things. On pressure on public services, pressure on housing, and that's a big issue in this part of the world. I don't think we've thought this through. I don't think my predecessor politicians have thought through the impact of all of this. It might make sense in theory, but the practical implications, the reality of someone like you looking ahead, is it's quite scary. You're trying to think, well, where do my children fit in this world? How are they going to make their way? I'm well aware of it, but the solutions to it can't be a bigger state and more state expenditure in a situation where we are hemorrhaging money. I haven't got a clear answer as to what my solution would be yet. I'm thinking about it, but I can't believe that it's spending more money as a state because we just can't afford to. Maybe it back. Yeah.
Can I just change again the
Sure.
subject? We were talking earlier about democracy, and I think the very fact that we're all here means we all value democracy, and in fact we can ask some questions. But what is very troubling to me is what is happening behind closed doors at the moment, and it's a trade and investment partnership that's being negotiated between the US and between Europe, and that is all to encourage trade and make us wealthier. But there are clauses in it that are really pernicious. And one of the clauses says that if a corporation, one of these big global, very wealthy corporations, find that our government passes a law that's not to their liking, in the sense that it would make their profits go down, they can sue governments because of that. Now, to me, any clause that says corporations can sue governments is totally wrong, because then we lose our democracy. For instance, if we passed a law saying, like they did, it happened in Australia, they said we want plain cigarette packaging because this will, help the problems of smoking. They had already entered into one of these agreements with Hong Kong. And what happened was that the Asian arm of the big tobacco company sued the Australian government because they passed this law. Now, it seems to me everything you're talking about, education, everything, is like arguing how many angels on a pinhead if we're going through at the same time this whole thing of giving these big global companies the right to
well, I don't know the exact clause you're referring to, and I'll appreciate you writing to me about it. If what you're saying is accurate, I would also have concerns with that. I don't...
You can't believe it. I mean, most people, you say this to, surely a government wouldn't be that stupid.
But I mean, governments can be sued already in some situations.
Yes, exactly.
But
it's happened in Quebec.
Yeah.
Quebec people said no fracking in Quebec.
Yeah.
So a company, a fracking company, is suing Quebec for that law. Now,
Dr. Lee, could you just confirm that you are unaware of that stipulation that the multinational concern government?
Yeah, no, I wasn't aware of it.
Amazing.
It's absolutely crucial.
Sorry, is this a criticism of me not being aware of every clause of TTIP?
It's a rather important clause.
No, but
sorry,
okay,
you're our MP, as an MP one would expect you to be
okay. I mean,
aware of such an important
okay. I mean, look, if we're going to make silly little points about me not being aware of every single regulation, I'm sorry, sir, please. It's not possible for me to be aware of every single regulation being negotiated between the European Union and America around the TTIP deal. Okay, it's not possible for me to know about that and also be able to know about a whole plethora of issues which I will be asked about, have been asked about, and what I'm going to be asked about in the future. It's very easy, extremely easy, to come along with a particular concern, whatever it is, a particular single issue, and be an expert. I have to manage thousands of different issues, okay? And where I do not recognise the regulation, I honestly admit it, and I ask you to write to it, and then I will have an opinion.
I think we should appreciate that fact that we've got a politician who stands there and actually says that they don't know. Because most politicians will stand up there and waffle.
I think that is the pernicious thing about this. It's being done behind closed doors. They don't want us to.
I'm not disagreeing.
They want us to argue about Scotland and about what's going on in the Middle East. They don't want us to know this, and it is vital.
Yes. I would argue that each of the two things you just mentioned are just as important.
Well,
but I recognise that if what you're saying is true, I would have concerns about it. Please write to me, and I will investigate. So,
I know this is going to sound very mean-spirited. I know you borrow less money than the last government.
Yeah.
If you're borrowing £100 million a year, can you really afford to give £9 million away to foreign countries?
it's more than that.
It's more. But isn't it the British government's job to tax British people to enhance Britain, to spend the money in Britain? It's not your job to tax us to give it away. If we want to give charity, we will.
Sure, I agree.
And we do.
Okay, there is a role for international development funding in certain specific areas where I think you can see that there's a benefit to it. For instance, you could argue, for instance, investing in trying to control Ebola would make a lot of sense for the world, and we are part of the world. However, I agree, we spend £1 billion a month. Okay, so we, and some of the, a friend of mine the other day told me that we spent £4 million on trying to find a new Spice Girls in Ethiopia. Some of this expenditure is disgraceful. I personally, and those of you who know me, I'm publicly declared before the election I didn't support the Conservative Party's position on protecting 0.7% GDP. Okay, I said it before the election, I've said it since the election. I would get rid of the International Development Department. I would have a minister responsible for that area within the Foreign Office. Okay, that's my stated position, has been for a number of years. I totally agree with you.
It's probably press scam. You read in papers as a daily telecast, some of this money gets spent on papers personal jets.
There are problems. I think some of those stories predate us coming in, but there have been problems in some countries where the money has ended up. Yes, and the way in which the money has been spent. I, like you, think that our activities in this area should be via charities. We all can make individual choices of where we spend our own personal wealth, and I think this country has a rich history of doing so through a variety, Save the Children, Oxfam, whatever. There's a series of agencies which go out into these areas and deliver some much needed help and care. I think we should do it through that, and maybe there should be some tax breaks around donating to those organisations. I do not think that there is a role for spending £1 billion a month of British taxpayers' money on international development. No. Sorry, okay.
Having seen how our leadership has negotiated with regard to the Scottish referendum, are you confident that they will make a good job of negotiating with the EU when it comes to changing the terms and conditions of our membership?
Not particularly, no. Let's wait and see whether we have a referendum or not, because that's dependent on next year's election. And I think at that point, depending on the results, and I'll be out batting the results, I think then waiting to see what the negotiations the negotiations being weak, you vote against. You have the choice.
Thank you. I'm not quite clear regarding the next general election, whether it's before Christmas or afterwards. The members of Parliament will be elected for 5 years, but
currently
actually becomes independent in 2016.
Yeah.
So that means all the MPs elected in Scotland under the next election, yes, they're foreigners.
Yes.
They're representing foreign state.
Yes.
How do you get around that?
You don't, it's a constitutional process. That's what I was saying. This is the problem. I think the people who negotiated this, drew up the rules and everything else, just presumed the Scots were going to vote no. Yeah. I think there was an arrogance and a laziness about the whole thing. And I hope that that attitude doesn't come into roost this evening. But yes, you're right. You end up in this perverse situation where members of the House of Commons will be foreigners. The actual formal Independence Day doesn't take place. So, but it's, in effect, you've got people from a country that's going to be independent of us deciding on the details of the negotiation. It's just not telling.
But we would still try to ensure that Scottish MPs do not vote on English matters.
Yes. Yes, I mean, that's actually non-negotiable. I would say that there's a majority, the great majority of Conservative members of Parliament, of what was called the West Lothian question, has now become a deal breaker. It's, sorry, you're having all of this, you don't get to vote on what affects our constituents, when it doesn't affect theirs. So,
yeah, can I switch to foreign issue? In the debate that followed the slaughter of over 2,000 people in Gaza, in parliamentary debate, and many of your colleagues and the opposition MPs as well stood up and called for the Foreign Secretary to suspend arms supply to Israel.
Yep.
But in the film and television, you didn't seem to be saying anything. I wonder if you supported that, or if you didn't then, do you now?
Which debate? Is it the statement or the debate?
Well, it was questions to the Foreign Secretary, I think.
Yeah, I was sat in this, I was there.
Yeah, I do recall, and the camera was on you. I don't know what it was. And many of your colleagues on the Conservative side stood up and quite forcefully put forward the suspension of arms to Israel, which will put pressure on them, it will surprise them, it will put pressure on them, perhaps lead to some discussion on some longer-term peaceful solution in Israel. Would you like to comment on that? Because even now, they're stealing land in the West Bank. That's going on this very last few weeks. So
the government's response to specifically to the land grab has been quite firmly against.
Well, perhaps you could give us a
diplomatically, the statements are as strong as I've ever seen criticising Israel, specifically with regards to that land grab.
But have they, would you be supporting a complete suspension of the arms to Israel?
I would rather answer this question if you allow me about my own broader approach to Israel and Palestine, because I think it's very easy to sort of pitch up and you can sort of avoid the bigger issue is do I support, whereas what's my position on Israel and Palestine? And I don't know if you know, I'm Vice Chairman of the Middle East Council, and I've been to Palestine and I've been to Israel, and I've travelled extensively through the region, and I went there actually as a medical student backpacking as well to